Hello, and welcome to this week's reflection for Wednesday, the 26th of February. Have you ever been bullied at school or in the workplace? Have you ever been made to feel inadequate? Have you ever been in an abusive relationship? Have you felt ostracized, ignored, voiceless, or marginalized because you belong to a particular group in society? Have you ever been afraid to speak up for yourself or report abuse by those in power to those in power for fear that you won't be believed or taken seriously? The world today is full of people who are marginalised, excluded, and voiceless because they don't fit in with those in power or they are part of a particular minority group in society or they don't have the same views as those in positions of power. The government, the oligarchs, the leaders of our churches, schools, public services, the armed forces, and other institutions. Tackling inequality and social justice in society is an important part of the church's mission. The Bible is full of examples of unfairness and people who are marginalised because of who they are. Last week, Reverend Malcolm preached on John chapter 5, the healing of the man at the pool. This man was left excluded and ignored by society, shunned away, forgotten about for being an invalid, until Jesus healed him. As we approach the beginning of Lent, we're reminded of when Jesus was oppressed, marginalised, mistreated, blamed, and ultimately crucified. The Bible tells us that we should fight for social justice and stand up for the oppressed. Isaiah chapter 1, verse 17 says, "Learn to do right, seek justice, defend the oppressed, take up the cause of the fatherless, plead the case of the widow." There are people in society today who are marginalised, and we need to defend and seek justice for people who are afraid to speak up for themselves. The Right Reverend Marianne Budd, the Episcopalian bishop who led the prayer service at President Trump's inauguration ceremony in January, spoke out against injustice in his administration and his marginalisation of two groups in society in particular: immigrants and the LGBTQ+ community. She said, "In the name of our God, I ask you to have mercy upon the people in our country who are scared now. There are gay, lesbian, and transgender children in Democratic, Republican, and Independent families, some who fear for their lives. And the people who pick our crops and clean our office buildings, who labour in poultry farms and meat packing plants, who wash the dishes after we eat in restaurants and work the night shifts in hospitals. They may not be citizens or have the proper documentation, but the vast majority of immigrants are not criminals. They pay taxes and are good neighbours. They are faithful members of our churches and mosques, synagogues, wadara, and temples." Later in the sermon, she goes on, "May God grant us strength and courage to honour the dignity of every human being, to speak the truth to one another in love, and walk humbly with each other and our God for the good of all people." It's powerful stuff, and I cried the first time I heard it. Her whole speech is inspiring. If you haven't already seen the whole thing, I'd recommend you look it up on YouTube. Bishop Budd has received death threats in the USA for speaking out for these marginalised groups, but she's become somewhat a hero to many in the USA and also worldwide now for speaking out against social injustice and calling for peace, unity, and compassion to all. Now, I'm well aware of my privilege. I'm white, educated, middle class, and a British national. I've not known the struggles that some of these people have, but there is one minority or marginalised group that I can identify with: women. March the 8th marks International Women's Day, when we celebrate female empowerment and fight for justice for women. I don't want to do too much on that because it may be a subject of reflection for next week. But coincidentally, as I was preparing this reflection, I turned on the news and there was an extended item on the case of Jaisley Beck, the young soldier who took her own life after being subject to prolonged sexual harassment by her male bosses. Interviews with other victims of sexual abuse in the armed forces were very distressing. Abuse of women is not unusual. 83% of all domestic abuse cases in Scotland are against women. And it isn't just men who are the perpetrators. Women in same-sex relationships are also victims of abuse. Those in position of power need to be mindful of their status, their privilege, and have a duty to ensure all women feel safe and are not afraid to speak up when they are being abused, and that they will be listened to with compassion. So to finish up, last week marked the 5th anniversary of the untimely, tragic death of Caroline Flack, a bright, talented, 40-year-old woman who made one mistake and was consequently hounded by the media. She received violent death threats and suffered mental torment from the malicious things that were said about her. Her treatment brought shame on the media and on those who were so quick to judge. Following her death, the following quote went viral: "In a world where you can be anything, be kind. Thank you."